Hey everyone, welcome to the June 9th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and the subject of this show is previewing the Belmont Stakes Day card on Saturday, recording this day earlier than usual on Thursday to give you a little bit of extra time leading in to that Belmont Stakes Day card. We've got plenty of stakes all throughout the day, a plethora of Grade 1 events. We're going to focus primarily on the late pick 5 sequence, races 7 through 11, all Grade 1s culminating with the Belmont Stakes, beginning with the Ogden Phipps, leading through the Jaipur, the Met Mile, the Manhattan, and like I said, closing out with that Belmont Stakes race 11. And Craig, it's not a day with a ton of horses running, but I feel like if you want to see some stars in action, the right horses are competing on this card.
Yeah, there's plenty of star power. I think I put out on Twitter, it's not going to be the greatest betting day in my opinion, but as a guy that makes speed figures, I'm sure I'm going to get some really good performances from some of these horses and have a fun time with that. There are a couple decent races that I think we're going to talk about that offer some betting value. Plenty of star power, so I'm still looking forward to it. Maybe not quite as much as in a couple of the years past, but, it should be a good day for racing.
Yeah, as you were saying, when you have these small fields, you do often get a situation where horses tend to not encounter that much adversity, work out good trips. That's when they're able to run their optimal performances, and you see those bigger speed figures. So we're likely to see some nice performances on the racetrack. Just feels like the mutual payouts might be on the smaller side. We'll see if we can come up with some good ideas to string together into a multi-race sequence. Typically, that's the way to play these days, to try to have strong opinions and really hammer them home. And to help us come up with some opinions for the card, I'm happy to welcome back to the podcast OptixEQ analyst Emily Gullikson, one of our favorite guests. Emily, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me, and it's one of my favorite appearances, so glad it's mutual.
Emily, we were talking a little bit before signing on. It is a day where you really do have to pick your spots because you have these small fields, some heavy favorites that look pretty formidable. Is that how you approach a day like this from a wagering standpoint, just trying to have some really strong opinions and keep your tickets as thin as possible?
I think that's one way to go about it. I think the other way, and you really, there's kind of two ways when you're handicapping, right? You're handicapping the horses, you're handicapping the races, but you're also handicapping the other players, right? Because you want to cash. So you want to have a little bit of creativity, a little bit of a different opinion. So I think in some of these races, we talk about the sequence with the compact field, some of these heavy favorites, maybe try to either, anchor on those heavy favorites, maybe anchor on a second choice. And then in some of those other races, try to get creative, try to get a little bit outside the box, hopefully get a little bit lucky. And overall, it's one of those days where you're just going to have to be accurate and have good racing luck, just kind of the way the sequence plays out.
Yeah, as I said at the top of the show, we are going to talk primarily about the late pick 5 sequence, and some of the more interesting races on the card are within this sequence, particularly the two of the turf stakes races. I know you said you handicapped the entire card. Is there anything early in the day that really caught your interest? It felt like it could be a chalk parade throughout the first half of the day.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way. It looks like it's going to be pretty formful. So yeah, we'll have to see. There are 13 races, so hopefully somewhere in there, again, get creative, find some spots, get a little bit lucky with the tote board.
Well, let's dive right into this late pick 5 sequence, the mandatory payout pick 5, races 7 through 11, beginning with that Grade 1 Ogden Phipps, going 1 1/16 on the main track for the fillies and mares. And I know this is just a 5-horse field, but it really is the right 5 horses. You would imagine that all 5 of these could show up in the Breeders' Cup Distaff later in the year, hopefully with a few others in the mix as well. But we do have the top players in the older filly and mare division in action here, including the defending champion in this race, the number 1 Latruska. Emily, I'll start with you. Latruska just has this easy early speed, and in her last few races, nobody's really challenged her on the front end. That made her impossible to beat in the Apple Blossom. Are we supposed to think it's going to be any different here?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, when she gets that easy lead, especially if she's able to kind of control the pace up front, uncontested, she can be extremely tough. And there is a scenario where she's able to get that in here. If she's drawn on the inside, she has that early speed, and it'll really come down to the tactics of some of these other horses. Malathat has early speed when she wants to, same with Search Results, but, we don't know what the riders are going to do, right? If they try to take back and stalk, Latruska could be gone. Malathat and then Search Results will have to take up that pressing role. Maybe they go a little bit faster than what they want to run, trying to contest her pace, which would set up a trip, in my opinion, sort of the way I'm looking at it, for Clairiere, one that could show a little bit more tactile speed, also exiting the Apple Blossom where she was against the flow after that slow start. But yeah, I mean, tactically kind of one of those races where I could kind of be sink or swim in here if Latruska does get loose and lone and goes game to wire.
Yeah, Craig, I feel like this is one of the tough decisions to start off the sequence to decide how heavily you want to lean on Latruska or if you want to take a shot against her, because I feel like this is one of the races where, even though it's a small field, people might be tempted to use multiple horses or spread a little bit into the small field. How do you feel about it? I have a feeling I know where we're going here, but it does appear that Latruska is going to get the kind of lead that she typically enjoys when she puts forth her better efforts.
Yeah, I don't think this is a race where I want to try to beat her, just because with the short field, I don't think there's going to be any real value in doing so. I mean, Malathat's going to be the second choice. Maybe if Clairiere's really 3-1 and Search Results is 9-2, maybe she'd offer a little value, but I just can't get excited about this one. I think Latruska is going to have things her own way. If the others try to press her, they're doing so out of their comfort zone, trying to keep up with her early. And the other thing that, if this was a mile and an eighth race, I might think differently, but it's not. It's a mile and a 16th, and I just think Latruska is going to be super tough in here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Latruska is breaking from the inside. I don't feel like they're going to mess around. I mean, he has to open up a little bit on the field. The intention has to be to intimidate anybody from trying to apply that pressure. And I just don't feel like anybody in this race, aside from perhaps Search Results, is even fast enough to really make her run on the front end. Chad Brown, that's probably not going to be the instructions anyway. With Search Results, they'll probably just sit outside and hope to turn it into a sprint to the wire. But it's almost impossible to beat Latruska that way. So I find her to be a very likely winner of this race. Emily, I'll briefly go back to you, because there is a horse in this race that I feel like you do have to develop an opinion about to kind of determine whether or not you think she's a viable alternative. What did you make of Malathat's last race? And I feel like every speed figure had it pretty slow. It was obviously just a prep for this, but what do you make of her overall? And do you think she's one that can take that step forward as a 4-year-old to put herself in the upper echelon with Latruska?
I mean, generally speaking, I would say yes. I'm also at the same time not necessarily sold that this is the spot, just because it does come down to the race dynamics. And I think she is going to be kind of forced to press Latruska. It's just sort of the way I see the race, with that most recent race, with the race flow coming up late, getting back to Belmont. I shouldn't say getting back. Well, I guess getting back to Belmont. She did run here in her debut, where she did show early speed. And that just seems like it's going to have to be the tactic, just based on the compact field of this race shape, to give herself a chance to run. And then again, it's kind of taking her out of that running style in that second start off. She has the class. She has the speed figures. I just don't think this race necessarily sets up as well for her as it could going down the road.
Yeah, I hear that. And, you brought up Clairiere and taking a positive view of her in this race, and I get that. I mean, they were pretty even last year. Malathat obviously did a little bit more winning than Clairiere, but at least with Clairiere, we have that proof that she's taken that step forward from a speed figure standpoint as a 4-year-old. I don't think we know that yet with Malathat. I mean, for me, when I look at the speed figures for all these horses, I'm just kind of drawing a line through the Breeders' Cup Distaff, because a lot of horses, no matter what figures you look at, got a very inflated number in that race compared to their prior form, and some, like Latruska, that were involved in that pace, just, their form really dipped that day. So I'm viewing that as a little bit of an aberration. And if you take that race out of Malatot's PPs, she's just a little bit slow compared to some of the others in here. So it is possible she takes that step forward. She is, has that reputation as a horse that sometimes runs toward competition. And I guess that's the belief is what she was doing last time when she ran that slower speed figure in the double dog dare. But I feel like she's going to be the second choice in this race, and I don't think that she has to necessarily be in the top two. So I kind of was looking at it along those lines. My other horse would be Search Results. I might have mentioned that already, just thinking she would get the right stalking trip. But yeah, like Craig, I'm not trying to beat Latruska in here. Let's move on to a race where hopefully there are a few more directions we can go. Onto the turf course in the Grade 1 Jaipur, going 6 furlongs for the older horses. No, this is on the Widener turf course, not the inner, so bit of a more gradual turn, less of a run into the turn, though, which could be notable in this large field. We do have 13 signed on. I pegged the Wesley Ward-trained Arrest Me Red as the favorite, and Craig, I'll go to you first. When I was looking at the pace projector for this race, I know it's not flagging a particular running style as having an advantage, but doesn't seem like there is that much speed in this field.
No, there isn't. Arrest Me Red shown on the front end, and he has in the past shown he can go wire to wire, particularly at this 6 furlong distance where it tends to be a little slower up front than in the 5 and 5.5 furlong races, which he's been running in. But he's not a confirmed front runner. It's not like he has to be in front, but that just tells me, yeah, there's not a lot of speed. And when you look through the PPs, it's nothing different. I don't think anyone would come to much of a different conclusion. So he's a horse I have to use if I play this pick 5. I've been beaten by him a few times, and frankly, he's a horse I've underrated, but I thought his last race was pretty good. But I don't think he's a cinch by any means. These 6 furlong races tend to play out a little bit differently. I think it is kind of tough to go wire to wire at times because you do tend to get pressured on that big turn at Aqueduct. It's not the tight turn we're used to seeing on some of these turf courses. So a couple others I use. I'll have to use Casa Creed in here. He's a horse who's going to need some pace because he does not have a lot of early speed, but I've always liked him at this 6 furlong distance. He had a nice win in the Jaipur last year over a more of a soft turf course, but I just think it fits for him. I think he ran well overseas, better than what I expected in his 2 starts, particularly Saudi, where he almost got the win, and then in a tougher field in Dubai, he was only beaten a couple lengths. But the horse I would make my top pick is Gear Jockey, who's drawn outside. I have a feeling he may be a wise guy horse and get bet more than that 6-1 morning line. Not saying it's a bad morning line because I think it fits, but I just hear a lot of talk. But watching his replay last time, and you can say this about several of his races, it was just a really tough trip. And I think this 6 furlongs is going to fit him a lot better. He should be able to work out a clear trip from the outside. So if I had to say there's one horse that I think is going to offer real value, it would be him.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. And I think in some ways you kind of have to look at it as from what horses you want to take out of the turf sprint at Churchill Downs on that May 6th undercard. And Gear Jockey certainly being one of those for the reasons that Craig mentioned as far as the trip. And I think also it could be a positive rider change, at least showing some positive intent, as Lascano's been aboard in the past, has had success on this horse in the Naira circuit. So that seems like, the move forward. As far as Arrest Me Red, he could certainly win. I'm not as crazy about him in this spot. I think the pace scenario is a little bit interesting. It's not as contentious. You don't have a lot of those front running types that are going to duel, but that can also create a scenario where you have horses kind of bunching up on a slower pace, and then you need some ability to close. And I don't know if Arrest Me Red has that kind of closing ability where he's just kind of, tends to be in the right place and time and benefits from the trip and the race flow. What makes Sammy run also coming out of that race and getting a rider change with Pratt aboard. But I think Gregorian Chant, the 13, is probably another horse that you want. Maybe he's a little bit obvious off that trip and 3rd place finish. but another horse that just kind of has established form. They ran in this race last year, took a different tactic that day where he was up close to the pace, Casa Creed, and even the second place finisher, Chewing Gum, who maybe could have won that race. Both came from off the pace. So it could be a little bit of an upgrade from that race. And I wanted to kind of get creative in here, looking for just like such a wild card because some of these races could be super chalky. So I'll go kind of outside the box with number 9, Filo de Ariana, going back to the Woodbine race. That was a strong speed figure, a strong closing kick. Could be a little bit of an excuse at Keeneland over the good course, a shorter distance, has worked steadily since. Seems like maybe there's something there, and coming into this race off that poor effort running in a grade 1 could suggest positive intent. So that's my creative idea in this race.
I like it because personally, I wanted to go for a long shot in here, and I was struggling to come up with one. So I like that kind of idea in a race like this, but it does feel a little bit chaotic. I'll say when I went to handicap this race, I wanted to be more against Arrest Me Red than I ended up being. It does feel like he's kind of obvious, and given the potential pace advantage or the perception of one, he could get bet down a little bit. And I don't think he necessarily has to work out the perfect trip, and I don't view him as significantly more talented than a lot of other horses in here. So, I mean, I feel like he's not necessarily great value, but I do recognize that he's one of the main players in this race. Overall, I didn't take that positive a view of the Twin Spires turf sprint at Churchill Downs. It was just a race where everybody hit the wire together. I didn't feel like anybody ran particularly well. Some did have trouble in there, and I suppose the result could have been different if you switched up a few trips. But it was just a race where I had trouble separating the horses, and I didn't necessarily want to take anybody out of there. So I wanted to go in a little bit of a different direction. I probably landed on some horses that aren't going to be that big prices, but they'll probably be better prices than Arrest Me Red. I mean, I know that he's got a little bit of a reputation. He could take money too, but I just feel like Casa Creed is way the horse to beat in this race from a class standpoint. I know that he got a good pace setup when he won this race last year, but it was kind of a similar situation, if you remember. Coming in, Bound for Nowhere looked like the clear speed in the race where nobody would press him, and you had some horses that I guess the connection sensed that same thing, and they took their horses out of their typical running styles to press Bound for Nowhere. Actually, I think the most surprising of those was Gregorian Chant, who was pressing the pace that day, and it just was not a running style that turned out to be successful for him, and the pace came apart, allowing Casa Creed to do well. But, I mean, he won that race by 2 lengths, which is a pretty decisive margin in a turf sprint. He was much the best, and I feel like he's run nothing but good races since then. I did think that Junior Alvarado botched a few of his rides last year, which probably cost him achieving some better results, but turning back to the sprints, I know they were foreign races, but I thought he ran really well in both races in Saudi Arabia and Dubai, particularly 2 back when he just missed to Songline, who recently came back and won their championship mile race in Japan. So Casa Creed just feels super logical to me. He's been in great form, and I'm hoping that he doesn't have to come from quite as far back as last year. And the other horse that we haven't mentioned yet that I just think it's hard to ignore based on the form that he's in is the number 8 Scuttlebuzz. Again, another horse that needs some pace to close into, but he loves this course. He loves the 6 furlong distance. And if you go back and watch his last race, I know he was somewhat of a surprise in there, winning at 15-1, but I mean, he just traveled in the bridle the entire way. I don't think Javier Castellano ever had to even hit him with the whip. He just took him into every right spot. The pace was on the quick side, but he moved into it pretty early, held off the closers, and he's probably better going a little bit shorter than that. So I don't totally trust a Rudy Rodriguez trainee to win a Grade 1 turf race, but it does feel like he's coming in with his last race stacking up against a lot of others in here, and I don't think he's going to be among the favorites.
Yeah, my only issue with him is I'm not sure if he's fast enough. He hasn't really run speed figures that could beat several of the horses in here. He's not that far off, but I mean, it's a couple lengths can be pretty significant. So for me, I'm going to take a pass on him. As to Emily's long shot, Fila de Ariana, Yeah, I kind of like what you're saying here. He's a horse who probably wasn't really ready to roll last time off that very long layoff, and he had actually had an even much longer layoff before that. So I think it's really a good sign that he's coming back so quickly. It's obviously something we haven't really seen from him in a long time. So he's one I would use. I would certainly expect a much better race than what we saw at Keeneland.
Yeah, from a pace standpoint, Emily, did you consider a horse like the number 3, True Valor? I found myself trying to make a case for him just because he figured to be forward in this race. I couldn't quite get to making him good enough to win.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the question is the class, and like what Craig brought up about the number 8 being in form and having, form over this course. Sort of the same thing with True Valor as far as like if he is fast enough. That was probably the race he was sort of met. Maybe they were looking at something at Laurel. And this is just such a step up in class from those races. So he would have to prove it. And again, just kind of finding the right trip and where he fits in this field is just a little bit of an unknown. Not the longest shot. Certainly wouldn't be any surprise for people that want to use him. But I just kind of went in a different way.
All right, let's move on back to the dirt course for race 9, the Grade 1 Met Mile, the Metropolitan handicap going that distance as is described in the title, the 1 mile on the main track at Belmont Park around the one turn, and it's a small but obviously select field with 2 of the best horses in this division, arguably 2 of the best horses racing right now in the United States in the 2 that are drawn down towards the inside, the number 1 Flightline and the number 2 Speaker's Corner facing off in this race. There are some other good runners in this field, like last year's Breeders' Cup Sprint winner Aloha West and the 2020 Jockey Club Gold Cup winner Happy Saver, but it really is about those 2 runners drawn down towards the inside who have shown so much brilliant speed. Emily, I'll throw it back to you. Flightline, do we trust him coming off the layoff? I mean, or is he just this freak of a horse who nobody can run with?
I mean, can it be both? Because you do have those scenarios where he is, he is this freak of a horse, but you do have that question. He is coming off a layoff. He's shipping outside of California. And there was a point in time where, Sadler shipping out of town was like, no one wanted to go near it. And then he won the Breeders' Cup Classic. And he's going to, do something new, stretch out to an extra furlong. But he's absolutely, when you talk about a horse that has brilliance, he's it. There's so few that really can claim that word. And as far as his early speed, that just could give him such an edge and really could make Speaker's Corner vulnerable in the sense that if he's going to have to chase Flightline, and Flightline is, the horse that he has shown to be, Speaker's Corner could get just completely caught up trying to chase him through that type of pace. I don't think he can duel with him. And I don't think Flightline will try to rate. That seems kind of wild. With that inside draw and the early speed and coming off the layoff and all those factors, I think they would try to just get clear and let him run his race. So from that perspective, we're talking about those two horses in this race, I would 100% have to take a stand with Flightline.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of drop in your head how you feel this race is going to be run from a fractional standpoint because there's not a ton of speed. Just on paper, it feels like you have those 2 drawn down towards the inside in Flightline and Speaker's Corner, and I think anybody looking at pace figures would see that Flightline is just naturally faster. He runs fast every step of the way in his races. Craig, does that worry you a little bit that he might be a runoff type that is unrateable on the front end and might go too fast for the mile distance, or is it just not a concern because this horse is so talented?
No, I don't think it's a concern, really. I'm going to have faith in John Sadler that he's bringing the horse to the track. I think he's going to be ready to go. He's obviously been very cautious with him. He's not going to run him if he's not ready. So for me, I've seen some people talking about the miles a question. I don't know how you can get that if you watch his last 2 races, unless he just gets to the furlong pole and stops. There's just no way that if he shows up, he's going to win the race. And I'm going to assume he's going to show up. And I'm kind of on Emily's side here. I'm not as high on Speaker's Corner. Obviously a really solid horse, but he's had a lot of pretty darn easy trips for supposedly good races, and Flightline is no Fearless or Endorsed or some of these other horses that he's been beating. Reinvestment Risk. Now, the Carters come back a pretty strong race, but only because the horses that he beat that day have come back in good spots. It's not like they jumped up and ran huge speed figures or anything. So for me, if I'm playing a pick 5, I'm single in Flightline, and I may try some verticals using Aloha West and Happy Saver underneath.
Yeah, I feel like we're all kind of along the same lines here. I was posing some questions, not that I necessarily think myself, just, some of the chatter that I've heard out there. But yeah, I agree with everything that you guys are saying. It just feels like Flightline is primed to deliver one of his good efforts, and just the way the pace figures to shake out, I feel like he's going to get the kind of trip that really works for him, just setting his own pace out front, not going slowly because he has a very high cruising speed that comes naturally to him, and based on his Malibu, it's hard to see him not sustaining it for another furlong. Just the way he ran through the wire that day, it didn't seem like he was stopping, and I mean, he just has this staying power in his races that typically is not matched with the early speed that he has, but he's a unique horse in that sense. So looking forward to see what he can put down on the track on Saturday, and how fast this race comes back relative to some of the others around it. And yeah, you have to wonder if Speaker's Corner is going to be a casualty if the pace that Flightline is likely to set, or having to go after that horse at some point in the race. Speaker's Corner is not... he has more of a turn of foot than I think Flightline does, but I'm not sure that's necessarily a positive in this race, because sometimes that speed can get a little bit sapped when you're chasing a horse going a little bit faster than you want to on the front end. So I agree with you guys that I would lean on Flightline from a multi-race standpoint, and I think if you're looking at this race from an intra-race perspective, just some exotic wagers, you might be able to beat Speaker's Corner in an exact or trifecta type of wager. I think Happy Saver is a real danger to finish second in this race, just for those reasons. He feels like the perfect turn back in here, one that can pick up some pieces if Speaker's Corner falls apart a little bit. So I'd look at playing the race from that standpoint, but yeah, just excited to see what Flightline can do, not really trying to take a big stand against him.
I'll echo.
Yeah, I should mention.
Oh, sorry, Craig.
No, yeah, of the other two, I prefer Happy Saver to Aloha West. Happy Saver, I thought his return was really good. He had no pace to close into that day. He made a nice move to actually get his head in front of Olympiad before getting a little tired late. But I don't even think he was getting tired so much as Olympiad just had a lot left in the tank. I wonder where he is for this race, to be honest. Obviously, maybe they're waiting for something else. But yeah, Happy Saver is the one that I like for second the most.
Yeah, Emily, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to add on, but I feel like we already have so much weight on that combination. We should probably just move on before we sink our own ships.
Yeah, let's not jinx it. Let's move back to the turf course for what I would say, from my perspective, is the most interesting race on the card, just because it seems so wide open, and that is race 10, the Grade 1 Manhattan, going 1.25 miles on the turf course. We really don't have a clear leader of this older horse turf division right now. It's kind of wide open, and I feel like we're going to learn a lot as horses kind of come together in this race. We've got some that are stretching out in distance, some that are turning back. That's what always makes the Manhattan so fascinating, is you don't have that many Grade 1 races on the calendar going the 1.25 mile distance. So there are some things to figure out in here, both from a pace standpoint and just assessing horses' overall quality relative to each other. Craig, I'm going to start with you. How are you looking at this field? And I do want to ask you about that race at Churchill Downs, the Turf Classic, because we've got a few coming out of here. How are you viewing those horses? I know that it got a gigantic speed figure on the TimeformUS scale. Are they just the best runners in this race, particularly Santine, or do you think that this is a more evenly matched group?
I'm viewing that race at Churchill with a healthy dose of skepticism, I believe, because the figure makes sense when you look through the field. There was a big gap from second to third, and you're usually going to get big figures from the top two, particularly in a turf race, but there was something weird about that track at Churchill on Derby Day. I can't say I know exactly what it is, but I just don't trust really any of the races or the figures from it. So I'm going to try to take a stand against those two that ran 1-2 that day.
Emily, how are you viewing this race and, the contenders in here? I pegged Gufo as the slight favorite on the morning line. He is a horse that just always seems to take a lot of money, but he's one that is very pace dependent, and I'm not sure exactly how this pace is going to shake out. We do have some speeds towards the outside. Tribovan feels like the one that kind of has to go to the front from, drawn inside the two others, Santine and Channelmaker, but I don't think it necessarily has to be a fast pace. So how are you viewing Gufo and some of the others in here that might interest you?
Yeah, I mean, the way I just kind of started, looking at the Chad Brown horses, because he's got such a bulk in this field, which one and how does the race set up, just from that type of like intention standpoint and looking at those horses, and you have the number 7, I think you said the name better than anything I would give a shot to. As like a confirmed front running type, he tends to be a pace setter. We've seen these kind of rabbit type horses steal races, but it does seem like he's more in it for pace. And there are others that can press. It seems like Channelmaker's going to have to get into it from the outside post to get into a race. Highland Chief showed some tactical speed. And, Gufo, he is a little bit, it can change his running style. He can run off the pace. He can stalk. And Rosario's kind of one of those riders that just kind of decides what he's going to do that day and alters that course. Just in terms of kind of overall, I think the race should set up for number 4, Adamo. When going back to the fairgrounds, and actually even watching his works before that, trying to get an idea of, who this horse is, what he wants to do. It looks like a horse that wanted more ground than that 9 furlongs. And even off that closing second place finish, give this horse more ground. And then when he showed up in the Turf Classic, it's like, oh, he's back at 9. He probably wants a little bit more ground. He ran against the flow. So I think this is the right spot for him, having that foundation, getting that added ground that he probably wants. So, I'm leaning in that direction. I'm curious to, because your kind of intro to this race, I was like, ooh, David sounds like he kind of has an opinion in here. So that's sort of my A. I do have a kind of a wild card with Tokyo Gold, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say on this race.
Yeah, I like that you kind of brought up the Chad Brown contingent in here, because he has, four horses in this race, and I agree with you that Adamo is the one that seems like he's best set up for success in here, but I also felt like, and I kind of captured it in my morning line, I feel like he's a horse that will take a lot of money relative to his prior form, because it's not like he's run that fast so far in this country, but I do agree with your assessment that it feels like he's kind of, being set up for this race. And I was talking to Marcus Hirsch about this when this horse ran on Derby Day. And I know he had done some chatting with Chad Brown over the winter. And he Chad Brown has been viewing this as his Manhattan horse for a long time. So perhaps that means that he really is going to take a step forward in this spot. And there is a clear scenario where the pace could work out for a deep closer like this. So I'm not against Adamo. It's just a race where it's so hard to figure out. So many of these horses are evenly matched from a speed figure and class standpoint. I wanted to do some price shopping, and for me, that wasn't the horse I wanted to emphasize. The other Chads, I can't say that I love any of them. Rock Emperor just doesn't win that often, and I feel like he's better going farther. L'Imperator is coming off a dressed-up win last time over a boggy turf horse that's not really indicative of his ability. And the other one, Tribovan, he's probably the horse that I'm most favorable towards in this race, just because his 2 best races have come over this Belmont Park turf course, both when he wired the field in the Fort Marcy off the layoff last year, and then when I thought he ran a huge race in last year's Manhattan, setting a strong pace and just getting run down at the end by domestic spending. Since then, they tried to go longer with him. I'm not sure that he really wanted to go the 1.5 mile distance. I think turning back really benefits him, and he's just one that seemed like he was compromised by the way that turf course was playing at Churchill Downs last time. You did not generally want to be setting the pace on the rail, and that's the trip that Tribovan holds. So I think that you can sort of draw a line through that race. He's likely to be more successful here. It's just a matter of him with how much pace pressure he has to deal with. I wish there wasn't as much speed in this race so I could have a stronger positive opinion on him. I am a little bit afraid they're going to get aggressive with Channelmaker once again, or that a horse like Santine could be pressing him a little bit. So I'm not 100% confident in him, but I do feel like he'll be a palatable price, even for a Chad Brown trainee. So I liked him a little bit, but yeah, I wanted to look for an even bigger price. The horse that I actually made my top pick in this race is the number 5, In Love. To me, he just feels like one that has to get lost in the shuffle here. And there are questions for him to answer, to be sure, specifically with regard to the distance. He's never gone this far, at least racing in the United States. But watching this horse's races, I don't get the impression that he's just a miler. They've tried to go a mile and an eighth with him a couple times, and he's actually finished off those races pretty well. And he's got quality. I mean, he showed that last year at Keeneland in that turf mile. I didn't even think he ran that badly in the Breeders' Cup, getting a somewhat wide trip around the second turn. And the maker's mark last time, I know he checked in last. Paulo Lobo, his horses, they're often not ready to go off layoffs. This one, he traveled well. It just seemed like he lacked some of that kick in the stretch when it really turned into a sprint to the wire. He's more of a grinder than that, which gives me some positive vibes about him actually handling this stretch out in distance. And I just feel like he's going to be a price in a race where you have so many elite trainers, elite riders. His connections are not ones that are going to pull a lot of money towards him, and I think he fits here. I like In Love, and he's one that I want to use along with some others in this race. But he was my value idea. Craig, I know you didn't probably finish your thoughts on this race, so I'll throw it back to you.
No, there's a couple that I'm gonna kind of lean on in this race, and they're both trained by Chad Brown. The first one is at Hamo, just because I think both of those first two races are not really representative of how good he is. I, like you guys, think he wants to go longer. And both of those were just weird, goofy courses. That Fairgrounds course they had listed as firm. It was more on the soft side than firm. The results from that day have just looked kind of wonky. And I thought he ran pretty good that day. And I've already talked about that Churchill Downs course, and I thought he ran okay there too, but I just think we're going to get the best version of him. I don't think he's going to offer a ton of value. I think you probably nailed it on the morning line, but I give him a really strong chance in here. And the other one is Trupeuven, who, for the same reasons you mentioned, I don't think you wanted to be speed on the rail last time on that turf course at Churchill. His two best races came over Belmont, as you said, and I actually thought he ran pretty good. So I think he's going to be loose on the front end, and I don't really see Santine as a pace horse. I know he's shown right up front, and he's been pretty close the last couple, but I suspect he's going to be a little bit farther off of it here from that outside post, maybe rating in third or fourth. So I'm hoping he can get away with slow fraction. So it would be the two Chad Browns for me. If I had to make a top pick, it would be at Hamo. And then I know Emily mentioned him, so I don't want to steal too much thunder, but it's impossible for me not to use Tokyo Gold at that 30-1 morning line.
I'm not sure that I heard that opinion, but that would be a bomb in this race.
No, I did call him out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about a different horse. I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay.
No, I mean, I'm just, you have a horse who's a lightly race type. He's 4-year-old, making just a second start of this campaign, and then going back to the Belmont Derby. Granted, that's, age-restricted company, so it could be softer speed figures, but did run a good race that day, closed in a blanket finish, and also, just kind of ran a good race there, so I was looking at the wrong running line. But has the experience over this course. He's going to come back today with a rider that's been aboard in the past, and his most recent win rider. So it just could be some positive intent with the ship and the rider change, and just as a horse that's it just could be improving. We just don't really know. Versus the other horses in this field, for the most part, we kind of know who they are at this point. And Adamo kind of being the other one that we could maybe make the case for that we haven't quite seen his best. So those were kind of like my two opinions, just lightly raced type. But I'm glad that you brought up In Love and what you saw, because I couldn't quite get there, but I also couldn't ignore him, because you're looking at a horse that is a Grade 1 winner and that has held his own against Grade 1 company, and that is just worth so much.
No, my apologies for mishearing you, but I like a clever idea like that in this race because I don't feel like the favorites are necessarily standing on such solid ground. And yeah, we talked about him briefly. I know Craig was talking about a little bit of the speed figure. Emily, what do you make of Santin? Is it just as simple as you got 7-1 last time and he's going to be among the favorites today? So that's typically not the situation that you want to be getting onto a horse's bandwagon. Or is there some possibility that he's going to kind of go that domestic spending route that we saw last year and it's just a lightly raced horse that might be able to really seize control of this division?
Yeah, I mean, he showed a lot of ability early on and improved in this 4-year-old campaign. I mean, talking about those races at the fairgrounds, they were just run so awkwardly. It was really hard to make the case. And then he had kind of a perfect setup just as far as having that form at the fairgrounds and the way the race set up for him in the Turf Classic and was in the right place and time. As far as that turf course, I think everybody kind of has an opinion about the way that it played, but no one can really say why it was doing the way that it was. And my theory is a little bit different. I think it's the banking of that turf course and with the rails down and allowing horses to have the momentum on the outside. That's kind of just my theory on it. But it was just sort of everything coming together, getting the right price, Walsh being extremely live. I mean, all of his horses on the turf were just firing, their A game that day. So I'm not against him overall. Again, he would not be any surprise, but I do also at the same time think last time was the time.
Well, let's finish up this sequence by moving on to the main event on Saturday, the final leg of the Triple Crown, the Belmont Stakes, going the 1.5 mile distance for the 3-year-olds, one circuit around that dirt track oval at Belmont Park. And I guess I'll start this one off. For me, it was just really hard to get past the way that this race is going to flow. And We the People breaking from the inside, it just feels like he's going to be able to set his own pace out there. I don't view the rail post position as any kind of negative. Flavien Prat's going to establish position, probably open up a couple of lengths on this field. If you are judging by the way that he rode Hot Rod Charlie last year in the Belmont and kind of getting inside Flavien's head to think how he believes you have to ride the Belmont successfully, I would imagine that he's going to get a little bit aggressive with this horse. And I think that's the right strategy. So I'll be interested to see how We the People runs in here, because he is a horse that, if you take the positive view of him, I mean, you could say that he won his first couple of starts so easily. Clearly something went wrong in the Arkansas Derby, but it just felt like he put things together in the Peter Pan last time. I'm not taking the view that that was some wet track freak-out performance. I mean, he just seemed like he really matured last time and displayed that high cruising speed that you want for a horse that can excel in the Belmont Stakes. Not that there was anything behind him in the Peter Pan, but when you win by over 10 lengths, that doesn't matter so much. And I just am not really thrilled with the 3-year-olds that are coming back out of the Kentucky Derby. The Preakness, I know, got a big speed figure. I'm not 100% confident in those horses either, or them necessarily running back to it, the two that show back up here. And I don't like defaulting to a favorite in a race like this, but I just feel like We the People is a presence in this Belmont that can't be ignored. And I went to him in this race, but I'm happy to hear what you guys think about whether or not I'm falling into a trap taking the potential post-time favorite. Emily, I'll throw it to you first.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to look at this race as We the People is the lone kind of controlling speed and should be able to just kind of coast on the front end. I think the pace is going to be a little bit more contentious and have a little bit more pace pressure. Again, it could come up to the riders, but Skippy, Longstocking, Ness, both those horses could press and might take up that role just kind of based on, their just kind of progression into this race and the way the race shapes up. And same thing with Creative Minister, one that has also benefit from kind of putting himself in the right place at the right time in his wins. So I don't think he's going to have as much of a pace advantage as it could appear, though he could have some pace advantage. I will concede that. His overall form is also a little bit concerning to me. So, following him going back to Oaklawn Park, he was actually entered in a sprint those races were canceled. I forget what happened before he ran the 2 turns first out, and did have a perfect trip that day. And then he came back and he was pretty washed out, winning that allowance, got a favorable pace scenario, even though he was the best of the speed, again, not the strongest field. And he was also pretty washed out and wide, not the most ideal scenario for him in the Arkansas Derby, but I thought he was a little bit vulnerable going into that race based on those first 2 starts. And then I'm also concerned about his form cycle coming out of the Peter Pan, because this will be a second start of the form cycle, recognizing it was 42 days between the Arkansas Derby and the Peter Pan. Now he's going to come back in 28 days. And while he was impressive, winning by 10 lengths, as you mentioned, he was also really tough to pull up out of that race. So how much running he did coming back in less than 30 days, where he's going to have to go longer, where he's going to have to face tougher competition, those are questions to me, especially as a horse that I think, I agree with the way that you assessed the morning line and created it, that he will be favored because people are kind of looking for that new face. Does look to have, that pace advantage, that big win, sort of being the right horse at the right time. So that's kind of my stance on him, is I think, if that's correct, maybe this is a spot where he kind of runs, maybe not similar to the Arkansas Derby, but not as strong as his most recent start. And I like Mo Donegal as a racehorse. I think this is the right spot for him. No questions as far as stamina. I think in terms of trip, he's not a deep closer. He's not a rich strike type that is a one-run confirmed deep closer. He can sit more mid-pack. The fact that he was off slow last out, I think that was part of the circumstance that prior to that race, Happy Jack acted up in the gate, and that kind of distracted Mo Donegal, breaking a step slow, and just, was a little bit too far off the pace. His timing was not as accurate as Leon on Rich Strike, making that first move. And that kind of left Mo Donegal no other choice than to force to go wide. I think he's going to sit closer to the pace, kind of sit from a, kind of quote unquote mid-pack in this 8-horse field. But his kind of grinding style, he's one of those horses that he's just going to keep grinding. And I just think he's going to get the trip in here. And, in the right place and time. Todd Pletcher, no stranger to this race. My confidence is there. I'm going right back to him.
Craig, how are you feeling about this one? I know all 3 of us had favorable opinions of Mo Donegal in the Derby. Are you keeping the faith like Emily?
I am. He's going to be a single for me if I do play a pick 5. I think he is way the horse to beat in here, despite the apparent pace edge from We the People, because I just keep flashing back to the Wood Memorial, where early voting was in a similar spot at a much shorter distance, had everything go his way, and Mo Donegal just came and got him. Now, he did get a great ride that day, no doubt about it, from Joel Rosario, but Irad Ortiz is certainly capable of the same kind of ride. He gets a lot more distance to do it. This isn't a big field where he's going to have to weave his magic and kind of get, stopped and started. And as Emily said, he's just kind of a grinder who, once he gets going, I think he's going to be fairly close to the pace and just be able to wear them down. Obviously, Todd Pletcher's had huge success in this race over the years, and I just think he's a complete standout in this field.
Well, I picked him, I believe, 3rd in this race. I'm not way against Mo Donegal. I was left a little cold by his Derby performance, and I still agree with everything Emily said about Irad's ride relative to Sonny Leon, and it just seemed like Irad didn't ride Mo Donegal with nearly as much urgency coming around the turn. He just didn't seem to be in a rush to get him into the right spot, waited a bit too long, had to go around all those horses. It still bothered me that he barely put any separation between he and Barber Road through the final quarter mile. I know he beat that horse by a length, but I was still looking for Mo Donegal to produce more of a kick in the land. Perhaps that's not his style. He's not really a horse that has any turn of foot. He just kind of grinds his way into the races, and I guess the way that Irad rode him didn't really suit that style in the Derby, and maybe he'll get a better trip here in the Belmont. I don't know. I felt like maybe the Derby exposed my opinion of him leading into the race a little bit because the Wood was good. I did feel like early voting really moved forward out of the Wood when he won the Preakness, so I don't want to get too caught up in thinking that Preakness result flatters him that much. I think he can certainly win this race. If he's going to be a similar price to We the People, I wanted to go more with the horse that I'm confident is going to get the right trip. And from a speed figure standpoint, I think they're pretty similar, though Emily brings up my chief concern with We the People, and that's just his overall temperament. I know there was a lot of talk about the way that he washed out prior to the Arkansas Derby, kind of lost his cool when they did the saddling on the turf course as opposed to in the paddock. So maybe taking this horse out of his comfort zone is going to take him out of his mindset once again heading into the Belmont, and he is coming back to race at the same course that he did last time, but I do think it's worth noting at Belmont Park, the Peter Pan is a one-turn race where they start all the way in the far corner of the backstretch where it's basically silent. I mean, you're not having any distractions, and there's barely any fans at Belmont Park on Peter Pan Day anyway. So it's a very different kind of vibe than what he's going to experience with this race starting in front of 50,000 people at the finish line on Saturday. So that's a little bit of a concern for me, though Rodolphe Brissett seems to think this horse has progressed mentally since those Arkansas days. We'll see about that. I just, watching his last race, what Emily pointed out about him galloping out strongly, it just kind of confirmed in my mind what I was seeing, is that this is a horse that when he clicks off those 12-second eighths, he just gets in his comfort zone and keeps rolling, and I feel like he's the perfect kind of horse to win the Belmont Stakes that way. So I landed on him. I'm not excited about taking a favorite. I just couldn't really latch on to anybody else. We focused primarily on those two horses. We haven't really brought up the Derby winner, Rich Strike. Emily, what do you make of his chances? Is it just as simple as you can't take a short price on him after he was 80-1 last time? And I mean, he is kind of a wild card in this field.
Yeah, I mean, I think value does have to come into play. I mean, as far as his Kentucky Derby, I've been on kind of the record about this. I think he was a longer shot going in, making the race than actually his chances of winning the race. But everything really worked out for him as far as that fast early pace scenario, the timing of that ride. I mean, I just, somebody that watches a lot of trips, I just watched it over and over again just because I was so impressed. I watch a lot of races. You rarely see a ride where it's like, my God, he just, the timing and like hitting all those pockets was just like, it was impressive. It was like, Ferdinand Derby type run, hitting all those spaces. And I just don't think this race sets up as well for him, because he is that kind of confirmed closer. Using Optics plot data, it's a big difference that in the Derby, being a quad four squared with having that contention, to now today he's a quad four circle, so he doesn't really show as much finishing kick as he did in the Derby, which is a change, and it's a significant change, especially when you're talking about a shorter price. So I don't think that his Derby is a fluke. I think he is a good racehorse. I think that he earned it, and he's the deserving Derby winner. I just don't think that this race sets up as well for him, and he would really have to prove it here.
Yeah, Craig, I know you didn't touch on this horse much either. I assume that your feelings are similar, though.
Yeah, I think his Derby was a good race. I don't want to look at it as some fluke. It was just a race where he got a perfect trip, a perfect ride, and that's a situation where I don't want to take a short price on hoping it's going to happen again, particularly with, and it's no knock on Sonny Leone, who gave a perfect ride, as we've all said, but he's never ridden at Belmont, to the best of my knowledge, and it is just such a different track, and especially when you're on a deep closer, trying to time your move, and I just don't really want any parts of him in here. I think he'll run okay. It won't surprise me if he's third or fourth in here, but I don't really see much better than that. I guess we should talk about a few other horses in here. The one that kind of intrigues me is Creative Minister, because I guess it depends what you really think of that Preakness and how fast it was, because if you believe the speed figures, not just I gave, but several others, it was a really fast race, and Creative Minister was just 3 lengths behind early voting and Epicenter, who were probably the 2 top horses in the division right now. So I think you have to give him a long look, and I know you like Next a bit, or Nest, I should say, not Next. Personally, I don't as much, but I'm willing to listen to your arguments for her. For me, she's a little bit slow, but it is Todd Pletcher. It is a 1.5 miles. He's done this with a filly before, and it seems like they had this spot in mind for a while. So, I'm not going to totally dismiss her either.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about Creative Minister. It's not that I believe the Preakness figure is wrong. I just thought that he got such a perfect trip in that race. Brian Hernandez made all the right moves, just sitting on the rail most of the way, following, the right horses into the race. And he got through in the stretch. And I mean, Epicenter ran right by him late. He's okay. I'll just be surprised if he takes another step forward in this Belmont. They're asking quite a bit of him in 5 weeks. As for Nest, I mean, like you guys were saying, Todd Pletcher really has the Belmont thing figured out. He's won it with a filly before. Look, she is not nearly as good as Rags to Riches looked coming into that Belmont, but this is also a much, much softer field than the 2007 Belmont. And I don't want to get too caught up in speed figures and splitting hairs from that perspective in a race like the Belmont, where it's less about who's the fastest and really about who's tailor-made for this particular race. And she just strikes me as one that is going to get a pretty good trip in here and likely run fairly well. She's got that cruising speed. She seems to have plenty of stamina. I like the way that she stays on in her races. Nothing flashy, but I just feel like she's going to show up here. And, I was looking at past Belmonts and how fillies get bet in these races. You might think that they take a lot of money, but it's really not the case. They often go off at about the prices you'd expect them to, so I'm not thinking that she's going to be that short in here, and I just could get to a positive opinion about her more so than I could that Creative Minister, who I think is going to be in a similar price range. So I made her my second pick in here. She's one that I'd want to use in some multi-race wagers, but like I said, I landed on that fairly obvious speed horse, We the People. Emily, was there anybody else you wanted to mention?
I'll just kind of add on those 2 horses and then throw in a couple others. As far as Creative Minister, I'm concerned that he's just kind of peaked in his form cycle, running kind of 2 top efforts back to back, and now he's back on short rest again. It's a lot to ask of a horse that's lightly raced in a short period of time. So I'm less interested in him. I was less interested in Nest for kind of the reasons that Craig mentioned, maybe a little bit slow. The Kentucky Oaks was the plan. My partner John Doyle is more kind of to where you are, David. So I was like, all right, respect. Like, she's honest. Like, I guess I'm being kind of a little bit too harsh. And then I saw a clip of Mike Rapoli kind of floating around on Twitter saying, they're entered because it's good for the game and having filly in the race and putting horses. And so I was kind of like, I'm not, that's cool. Like, I'm into that, but now I'm kind of like, what's the real intention here at that point? So I'm sort of either way. She's more for underneath than I could make for a top pick. The horse I'm going to use underneath, number 7, Golden Glider, number 8, Barber Road, horses that aren't especially fast either, but 2 horses that just have a lot of try. Like, they're just, maybe they're not at the top level, maybe they know they're not at the top level, but they just kind of keep kind of pushing along and get into those minor positions. So those are the ones I'm going to use because I think the other ones, Creative Minister, Nest, even skipping long stocking because people want to kind of use that long shot in there, that those 2, I think, could just kind of be a little bit overlooked underneath the Modonical.
Well, that wraps up the late pick 5 sequence. Let's briefly just do a recap. Craig, I'll start with you. Just kind of go through and talk a little bit about potential strategy for a sequence like this. I'm sure that it's one that you could tackle with a fairly small budget. There are some races you might want to spread in, but I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I'm gonna play a small ticket, maybe for a few dollars, not the 50 cent, because I'm gonna single on some short price horses. Latruska would be the first one. I'm not gonna try to beat her at all, and I'm not gonna spread in races like that. In the Jaipur, I'm going to go with Casa Creed. I think has a good shot. He would be an A. I would also use a Resmi Red, who I think has a very good chance in here. And Gear Jockey. And basically, I'm not going to do the ABC thing in here because it's going to be a pretty short ticket. So I'm going to go 3 deep in that one. In the 9th, I'm going to single Flightline. I just think he's much the best. I'm going to have faith in John Sadler that he's ready to roll. And I just kind of look at it as he's been running more than 10 points faster than Speaker's Corner in his last couple of races. And if this was a race where he was running 125s and Speaker's Corner running 115s, I'd feel the same way. And in this case, it's even more of a strong thing because he's been running just epic speed figures, almost hitting the 140 mark last time. The Manhattan is the one race where I'm going to spread. I'm probably going to use several in here. I like Ed Hamo quite a bit. I will still use Santine. I'm going to use Tribhuvan. I will use your long shots in Love, Tokyo Gold, maybe even Gufo. I don't know if I want to get beat if Gufo wins somehow. Although, no, I take that back. At his short price, I'm not using him, considering the other horses I'm using. So, going to look for more of a price in this one. And then in the featured race, the Belmont, I'm going to single again with Mo Donegal. He's been my Belmont horse for a while. I haven't seen really anything to change that. So, I'm going to stick with him.
Yeah, Emily, how are you viewing potentially putting together a play for this sequence?
My strategy is actually pretty similar to Craig. We just kind of a different way. I mean, in the first leg, I'm going to single as well. I'm going to go with Clairiere. And that could be it for me. But I just think she's going to kind of be the right price. I want to take a stand in that race. I think she's good. And then race 8, I'm going to use a few horses as well. I'm probably not going to use a Resmi Red just because I want to catch a little bit of a price as well. The horse that we talked about, nothing outside of that. But going a little bit deep there. As far as race 9, I mean, Flightline, I'm going to be using Prime, probably a single. I will not be using Speaker's Corner in any which way. Maybe you could make a case for Happy Saver, just kind of looking at the way that it goes. But primary, it'll go through Flightline. Race 10, similar strategy as far as spreading. Adamo kind of being a key, then using some of those other long shots, the ones that we mentioned, and then closing out with Mo Donegal.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we have emphasis pretty similar in all of our tickets. I would be close to singling Latruska in this race. If I use backups, they would be Clairiere and Search Results. I would not want any part of Malathaat in this first leg. To me, she's just not a horse that I have a lot of confidence in winning this kind of race. In the Jaipur, I would probably make Casa Creed my only A and lean a little bit on him in a race where it feels like a lot of people are going to spread. I have a pretty strong opinion on that one horse, and my backups would be runners like Scuttlebuzz, Gear Jockey. Depending on how beefy this play gets, I'll see if it makes sense to throw in a Resmi Red, though he's not the kind of horse that I would really want to use defensively if he is going to be a very short price. In the Met, very similar take to you guys. Flightline is just a horse that you have to have most of your play go through if you have a positive opinion about him, and you got to fade Speaker's Corner a little bit. I guess I'd have to see how things are shaping up in the other races, depending on if I'd want a single Flightline or use a backup like Happy Saver, or potentially Speaker's Corner is about like a C, but it would be the kind of situation where I'd want almost all of the play to go through that favorite. And then the Manhattan, this would be the one where I would spread the most. I like In Love. It's not a horse that I want to lean on too heavily, but he'd definitely be one of my A's, as would Tribhuvan. Santine is a horse that I respect quite a bit. He'd be one of my main uses in this multi-race sequence. And then the others that we didn't mention that much that I could see doing well in this race are runners like Highland Chief. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that his last race was some kind of fluke. I could see him doing well once again. Probably not the right race for Channel Maker, but he's another horse that often goes off at an enticing price, and I could see that happening here. So he's one that I could also throw into that sequence. just a race that I would look to spread quite a bit because I'm going pretty thinly in all of the other legs. And then the Belmont closing things out, I'd lean most heavily on We the People, and my two backups would be the Pletcher runners, Nest and Mo Donegal, but nothing too clever for me in the final leg of that sequence. And yeah, as we were talking about at the start, it's a day on Saturday where plenty of stars in action, but you really do have to pick your spots if you're going to have a successful wagering day. Unless you have very strong opinions on long shots throughout, it's probably not going to be wise to try to beat the favorites in every race because too many of them look like they're just really strong and have a stranglehold on a lot of these races. Guys, did you have any different opinions on other races throughout the day, a long shot that you could throw out outside of this pick five sequence that you think might be able to do well, or did you just like a lot of favorites in the other stakes?
Me personally, I'm going to be watching some of the early races just as a fan. I do think there are some interesting horses to watch, particularly the Acorn. I think it's a showdown between two really, really good horses. Some people might be tempted to hand that to Echo Zulu, but I'm not so sure. I think Monterey is right there with her, is just one that's really, really good and is running great, really big numbers for Brad Cox. I'm interested in seeing Regal Glory. I'm not going to try to beat her, but more so Speak of the Devil, who was just ultra impressive at Churchill I think that was, it was actually on Derby Day. So I want to see if she can back that up over what I think will be a more normal turf course. But she was super exciting, and probably the horse I'm most interested to see on the entire card is Jack Christopher, and just see what he can do.
Emily, I know you kind of already mentioned you were envisioning a little bit of a chalk parade earlier, but I mean, did these races get you excited from a fan standpoint, or are you mostly just kind of hunting for those wagering opportunities?
I mean, for the most part, I'm a player. I'm looking for the wagering opportunities. They do look pretty formful. I mean, as far as, kind of echoing Craig, as far as, in the Acorn, I think maybe this whole panel is going to be a little bit against Echo Zulu, though we would appreciate her cutting back to the one turn. But Matarrea looks logical in here. I'm on the same train with Speak of the Devil. I think that was a grade 1 win in a grade 2 race, so this is probably the time for her. Race 5 may be worth getting a little bit creative. I mean, Lone Rock will probably be a heavy favorite in here, singles in some of those sequences. But I think First Constitution could be a little bit under the radar in this race, even though he's kind of coming off a good effort in the Flat Out Stakes. I just think he could come back with the same. Seems like a horse that's on the improve and offer value of the Pletcher pair, our trio in that race, and then over Lone Rock. So maybe trying to get creative there. Jack Christopher, I think, again, it's kind of like the Pat Bay Mile, where he just sort of fits that race. But, another one I kind of want to see where he's at and, where he's in improving. Provocateur maybe a little bit more interesting in that race, a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, I'm even more of a chalk eater than you guys because I picked Echo Zulu in the Acorn. So, just hard for me to find too many opportunities early in the day. I will say, you mentioned the Brooklyn, Emily. I've been saying forever that I really want to see Fearless try one of these marathon distances, and they're finally giving him the chance here. So I like his chances quite a bit to beat Lone Rock in that Brooklyn. But that does feel like a spot where you might be able to take a shot against a favorite that's in a race that seems like it came up pretty tough. But certainly just from the chance to see some good horses on Saturday, there's a lot to look forward to. And we'll see how the wagering works out. But there are sure to be some pretty exciting performances on that Saturday card. Emily, I just want to say thanks, as always, especially this week, for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy schedule to join us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is fun. I actually got more excited about the card doing this conversation, so I hope people will listen and appreciate that as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Emily. Always a pleasure.
Well, Craig, as you know, I'll be on vacation next week, starting right after the Belmont Stakes, so we're probably not going to do our typical pace cast to recap the Belmont. I guess I'll leave it up to you, Craig, if you want to have a guest on to talk about these races, but I will not be your guest that day. So we'll definitely catch up. I'm sure we'll talk about these races when I'm back in a couple weeks, but we're just a little bit of housekeeping that we're not going to do the typical schedule of podcasts next week, and I'll just leave it up to Craig what but he can handle, because I know he'll have some extra responsibilities next week with my absence. But everybody, again, thanks for listening to this preview of Belmont Stakes Day. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks to Emily, thanks to Craig, and thanks to you for listening. Good luck if you're playing Belmont Stakes Day on Saturday.